There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 243. And today on the show, I'm joined by Ryan Fuhrer of the QDMA to take a very advanced look at how wind, thermals, and air currents impact deer and deer hunting. Before we get to the show, though, I want to give a quick thank you to our friends at Lacrosse Boots for their support of this podcast episode. I've been wearing the Alpha Burley Pros this year with 800 grams of thin slate insulation. Been very comfortable so far, and I put them to the test this past week as we were down into temperatures into the 30s. That's the coldest I've worn them in so far this year, and it wasn't an issue at all. They were super comfortable, kept me warm, kept me in the tree, happily hunting, and that's all you can ask for from a boot. On top of that, they're also waterproof. They're about as scent-free as you can get when it comes to a boot. They are comfortable hiking pretty long distances. Surprisingly, even though it's a rubber boot, these boots fit your foot quite nicely. I've walked long distances and it hasn't been an issue. So if you're in the market for new boots, head on over to lacrossefootwear.com to learn more. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Onyx. And today in the show, we're going deep into the weeds on a single topic, and that topic is wind and thermals and air currents and all these things and how they impact how deer smell and how you and I should be hunting. And joining us to have this discussion is an avid deer hunter and the Quality Deer Management Association's Senior Regional Director and Field Supervisor, Ryan Fuhrer. And Ryan is a guy who has hunted mature deer all across the country, and he's studied this craft under some of the very best hunters out there. And one of the keys that Ryan is so successful is because he's gone above and beyond the average hunter's understanding of this topic of wind, thermals, how deer smell. Ryan is an absolute wind and thermal junkie, so it just seemed to me that he would be the perfect guy to help us get into the nitty-gritty of this topic, which is really of the utmost importance for deer hunters. That there might not be a single thing more important for deer hunters than understanding wind and how these deer smell, because the nose, as most of us know, the whitetail's nose is its number one defense mechanism. And if we want to get close to these deer, especially a mature buck, we have to find some way to avoid their nose or fool their nose or take advantage of some kind of weakness that they have, because there's not very many weaknesses. So Ryan is going to give us a level of in-depth knowledge on this topic that I don't think we've ever gotten to before on the podcast. And I'm very excited about that. With this being the case, though, I do want to point out that if you are a brand new hunter, if you're just getting into it, or if maybe you haven't started hunting yet, you're just intrigued, it's likely, I guess, I was going to say there's a chance, but it's probably just plain likely that some of these concepts and details are going to get a little bit confusing for you. This is definitely an advanced kind of course that we're taking here today. So I'd recommend that if you fall into that camp, make sure that you go back and listen to some of the past podcasts, especially the Deer Hunter, or Beginner's Guide to Deer Hunting podcast. I think that was episode 216. that's going to give you a brief introduction to understanding the wind and how that impacts deer hunting. Understand that first and just kind of try to wrap your head around that. Try to implement that before you get into this level of detail. And even after that, if you come and you start listening to this one, don't get discouraged if this does seem a little daunting. Learning a deer hunt is a challenge. There's a lot to it. And that's why I do want to say one more thing to you new hunters out there. At a minimum, during this episode, fast forward and listen to the last 15 minutes of this one, because at that point in the show, we actually pivot in topics and we end up talking about some of the programs that the Quality Deer Management Association is putting together to help mentor and bring new hunters into the fold. So there's a few different programs, a couple different ideas, and suggestions about how you can get connected with folks who can help you learn how to hunt. Definitely want to make sure you guys hear about that. Now, for the rest of you that are into this kind of heavy detail, advanced wind kind of conversation, get ready for some very interesting stuff. And we do have a very exciting bonus guest joining us today too. I'm not going to say who it is yet. I'm going to kind of make you guys wait and find this one out. But I will give you a clue. His name rhymes with birder, so there's that to look forward to as well. Now that said, before we dive into this one, we do need to thank one of our partners who helped make this podcast possible, and that is onX. onX is the maker of the onX Hunt app. And just a couple days ago, our bonus guest for today's episode, Birder, well, we were up at our Northern Michigan deer camp. And on our second evening of that hunt, we decided to go and hopefully chase some deer on some public land that we'd never been on before. At the truck, before we headed out to hunt, each of us pulled up our onX app and we marked our truck location, so we knew where we had to come back to after dark. Then we each downloaded an off-grid version of the map. Just in case we lost service, we would still be able to see the map, we'd still be able to see our location, and then we headed our separate ways. As I started walking, I turned on the tracker feature that the app has, which records your exact path as you walk along somewhere, which would allow me, after dark, to follow that same path all the way back to the vehicle. Then, as I was sneaking into the timber, I had the onX app up, looking at it the whole time to see the aerial map on the phone and comparing that to what I was actually seeing in front of me. And I worked my way towards a certain terrain feature I saw on the map that I thought might be promising. Now, I bring all this up, I mention all this because I think it's a great example of how handy and how often the onX Hunt app can be used during a hunt like this. So if you'd like to check it out for yourself, head on over to your mobile app store of choice and search for onX, that's ONX. If you do end up purchasing some of the maps, you can use promo code WIRED, that's WIRED, for 20% off. All right, I am here now with Ryan Fuhrer and Josh Furter Hilliard on the line. This is gonna be a good time. And Josh, you've been on a ton. We don't need to introduce you too much, but Ryan, first time appearance on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And it's kind of interesting. This is going to be an interesting dynamic because, correct me if I'm wrong, but technically, Ryan, you're Josh's boss, right? So if I tell you all the dirty secrets that Josh has, is that going to get him in trouble?
Yeah, no, yeah, technically I am his boss, but no, it's definitely not going to get him in trouble.
I'll be on my best behavior, Ryan.
Yeah, definitely be on your best behavior.
So,
just kidding.
What do you think about the fact that Josh has become iconic in the hunting world with a single name? When people hear Furter, they know who this man is. Is that impressive or scary?
Yeah, that's awesome. Like one of the first times I heard it, I was like, man, you got to run with that. Furter, it is. And he's like, no, it's one of those horrible nicknames. Oh, my God, I can't believe it's taken off. And, I think I'd sent him a few text messages where I'd started out or ended with Furter. And then I even got a couple people at the office, which actually my boss would be Josh's boss's boss, sent. I saw an email one time that he finished with #Furter. So it's definitely picked up some speed there. It's just pretty cool.
That is funny. Never would have thought back in high school.
I get emails from people like addressing it to Furter, like not Josh. It's like, hey Furter, like I want to start a branch or what's going on at this event. And it's like, oh my gosh, just ridiculous.
We need a T-shirt.
Yeah, we really do. So I guess
I'll take 25% of those profits.
I might have to negotiate that down a little bit, Josh. But I'll give you a good handshake and a slap on the back. How about that? But Ryan, could you give us a little bit of an introduction, like kind of a cliff notes, as I usually like to try to get here, as far as what you're doing, since you're Furter's boss, but what does that mean? And how did you kind of get to this point? I'd like to hear a little bit about your personal journey too, real quick.
Yeah, sure. So what am I doing as far as with QDMA? I oversee the regional director. So Josh is a regional director for Quality Deer Management Association, and there's be 8 others aside from himself. And, they basically, are the grassroots. They're in touch with the volunteers out there in QDMA land doing their stuff. And Josh is kind of the liaison between them and the home office, making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, so to speak, whether it be grassroots fundraising, educational events, habitat management type stuff, all facets really. Being a regional director is a pretty interesting job because, you wear so many different hats at any different time of the year, obviously. But so I oversee those guys, make sure that Furter's out there doing what he needs to be doing and such. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what I do, among other things, the home office responsibilities as well.
Okay. So I understand you have an interesting kind of history as a hunter, though, too. I've heard rumors that you've spent a lot of time with the Wensels maybe back in the day, and you've kind of been all over the country hunting and shooting tournament archery and stuff. Can you fill in the gaps on that?
Yeah. I guess, I'm really fortunate to work, for the Quality Deer Management Association. I say that because everything I've ever done in my life, one way, shape, or form, has revolved around a whitetail deer, even from an early age. So I started shooting archery at about 8 years old, only because I was just extremely fascinated with bow hunting. I wanted to be a bow hunter really bad. And interestingly enough, my parents weren't really hunters. My dad hunted. He was the type, he may hunt the first day of Pennsylvania gun season, with the other 1 million hunters type of deal, but, never bow hunted or anything like that. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, I had a friend in, grade school that his dad owned a small archery shop, and it was within walking distance of my house. It was just a little, 25 by 30 building type of deal, like a garage. And I was just fascinated by everything in there, the art, the bows, the arrows, the broadheads, even the smell of it. I can still remember the smell. And it literally, it took my life over trying to be a deer hunter, a bow hunter, and learning on my own. So, I started shooting a bow only to be a bow hunter. Then that kind of led into a couple local tournaments, here and there. And then, I started traveling on the weekends, as a youth to the bigger national 3D tournaments. This would have been back in 90, 91. So I shot all facets of archery through the early 90s. I actually shot and ended up doing pretty well. One time I was ranked 3rd in the world as a youth archer, 3D archer. Back then it was just the IBO. The ASA had probably just gotten started, so it was the IBO more so back then. I think my senior year in high school, or maybe the summer between my junior and senior year, I decided that's when I shot my first pro tournament. So I shot my first pro tournament in Bedford, Indiana, the IBO, which was pretty cool. I shot my first pro tournament with Randy Almer. He's a kind of a legendary bow hunter.
Wow. So
I was placed in a group with him. It was, really neat, but, and then it just kind of grew from there. I did a lot of shooting and a lot of hunting. Somewhere around that same time, that 17, 18, 19 time frame, I can't remember when, but I met, I was, kind of working in the industry, going to shows and such with the archery industry. In the summer, when I say working, it wasn't like it was a real high paying job. It was just basically they needed somebody to stand at a booth. So I went and did that, and they paid me $5 or something and bought me sandwiches. But, I met a fellow that was working for, I believe it was Dart at the time, Dart Interactive Target Systems, the screens, either Dart or ITS. I can't remember, 20 plus years ago. But anyway, he was doing the same type of thing as I was. And I noticed his last name was Wenzel. And I was a huge Wenzel fan growing up. In high school, when you put your favorite movie in your senior, your yearbook type of deal, mine was bow hunting October whitetails. And I remember I went to a pretty big high school. I remember everybody what's that? And that was my favorite movie at the time. And anyway, this kid has, his name tag said Brad Wenzel, and I was like, working in the industry, I kind of, got to know him a little bit. I said, "You in relation to Barry or Gene?" He was like, "Yeah, Barry's my dad." Like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me?" And then, him and I ended up becoming and still are, best of friends. And through him, I got, met Barry and Gene and hunted with them and, hung out with them and, whatever, just about everything with them. And that's probably when I really started, I guess, honing my craft as far as somebody would call it in another industry, I guess, learning the skills of a whitetail deer hunter. Before that, I like this. I've said it before with a couple of my buddies. I was like a wolf. It was the law of large numbers. I thought like if the harder you hunted, the better the outcome would be. And I just basically just hunted every minute I could, and I don't really know if there was any calculations or, methodical thinking behind anything I did back in those early days. It was just pure desire to be out there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I even still hunt some of the same ground. And I remember, where I may have had a spot where I hunted and I shook my head thinking, what was I thinking? And other times I walked past spots that I didn't hunt with thinking, man, what was I thinking? I remember this being all tore up with sign and I would walk through it to get somewhere else. So yeah, I really started paying attention to the details probably when I was around, 19, I guess. So I'll be 42 this year. So I guess a little over 20 years. Really started paying attention to the details, and probably more so than anything because of the Wenzels and even to take it a step further, probably Barry. I really, hung out with him a good bit and learned a ton from Barry Wenzel. I used to say like literally, like the Tiger Woods, to golf and the Michael Jordan to basketball. He just had a knack that was really, when I say had, I just talked to him yesterday. He's 74 and still doing it, but he has a knack for figuring things out or seeing things in the woods that other people may overlook, or just thinking a little different. I really can't even describe, and that's anybody, in any craft with a gift. They just have that little bit of an edge. And he definitely did, and definitely does a decent job explaining it as well.
Yeah. So when it came to that influential experience you had with Barry there, and you're growing up and now you're in your 20s and you're starting to, like you said, hone your craft, was there any kind of aha moment that maybe he pointed out to you, or maybe you kind of figured out yourself as you started implementing some of his ideas when you were actually out there in the field, or you're sitting at home and thinking about things? Like, I'm always curious for people, like when their light switch moment, where they went from, struggling to kill deer consistently or to kill mature deer consistently, and then they flip this switch and they get this moment and they say, oh, if I start doing this big thing, or if I start thinking about this big thing, and then everything kind of starts moving in a different direction. Do you have a moment like that that you can think of?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, but I can almost specifically put my finger on it. It was when I started to understand wind and how a deer used its nose, right? And then to take it a step further, I went into detail on breaking down how well a deer smells, and just in layman's terms, to try to be rather quick, we have somewhere between 5 and 6 million olfactory sensors in our noses. A German Shepherd has somewhere around 238 million, and a whitetail deer has somewhere around 330 million. So, over 300 million anyway. But, but the point is, we know how well German Shepherds smell. I mean, some German Shepherds can detect cancer in humans faster than, or quicker than the world's most recent, MRI machines and cadaver dogs alerting to dead bodies through 200 foot of rubble in the World Trade Center disaster and that type of deal. So when you put it into perspective that a deer actually can smell better than them, it's an eye-opening, moment for you. Like, man, I really need my scent to be going somewhere other than that deer's nose, or, especially for a bow hunter. When you're talking, back then for me, inside that 30-yard line, you definitely have to pay attention to those minor details that puts that in your favor. So it was as soon as I started understanding the wind and direction, maybe not so much thermals at that point, but the air current, because there's a difference between wind direction and air currents. and how well a deer smells, and to do what I can to keep, an animal from smelling me, is when, it probably went, like, I remember struggling just to see a mature buck, like, even if I saw it off in the distance, I felt like I was succeeding. Like, oh man, there's one. Wow, cool. It was 100 yards away, but whatever. I finally saw, then a mature buck was, a 3-year-old. If I saw a 3-year-old back then, I was ecstatic, right? And then you can slowly, started picking up on the little things, and next thing you're seeing them quite, pretty regularly, and then, all of a sudden, you get that first one that walks by at 10 yards, and it's completely, you've went undetected. It just flips, and then you just start, so many of them aha moments start coming to you. They usually come to me in the middle of the night. It's weird. I have woken up at, 3 a.m. with, oh man, it's just like something that's clicked in my mind of an area that I'm hunting, or a ridge line, and, all this different stuff I had taken in, maybe just from the last 4 or 5 trips walking around or whatever, and then something would just click, and I know now exactly where that stand needs to be and why, and when, and what wind, and what's going on. And I've had a lot of those.
Yeah,
3 o'clock in the morning.
Man, you couldn't have teed me up better, because this topic that you just mentioned, wind and thermals and air currents and all of that, that's what I'm really, really interested in picking your brain about, because I know you've done a lot of thinking on this and a lot of work around this. So to start things off, can you elaborate? You mentioned a second ago that wind direction is different than thermals, is different than air currents. Can you help us understand how those are different, and I guess in the context of hunting?
Sure. So, wind direction is basically whenever you, wake up and you check your favorite weather app or whatever you may be looking at, the wind's out of the southwest this morning at 7 miles an hour. So that's what, the direction the wind is coming from. So it's coming from the southwest and heading off to the northeast. That's your wind direction. Air current, especially, and it changes whenever topography changes. So, I've done a lot of hunting in the Midwest, as you have. It gets flatter. So air current, it becomes more steady in the Midwest because of flatter topography. But, in the mountainous regions of Pennsylvania, like where I grew up hunting the big ridges, steep ridges and deep valleys. The air current, you have to kind of think of the wind, or the direction of the wind like water. Then it hits those ridges and it creates eddies, and I've seen it do it with rocks, and I've seen it do it with big clumps of trees. So you have the wind direction coming out of the southwest, and then the air current is what happens after, you get that steady wind out of the southwest pushing against a ridge line and just creating, basically perpetual motion, if you will, or an eddying, like in a stream. The water is eddying in a current behind a rock or in front of a rock or along or whatever it may be. And the stiffer the wind gets out of that direction, obviously, the more quote unquote perpetual motion that it creates. So that's the current. And then also there's a drift to that. When it picks up, when you get higher speeds, like today, it's over, it's gusting like 25 miles an hour. So then you'll have those gusts, and then those gusts will stop, and you'll have that calmness in between. But because of that 25 mile an hour power before of that gust, there's a drift effect. There's still a current there. And you can test that with milkweed, throwing it up, right when a gust takes off, and watch what it does while it's being blown by the end. And whenever you feel that wind basically shut off, that gust shut off in between those, you may have 2 gusts, how like that calm in the middle type of deal, but you'll still see that milkweed. It's doing crazy things because of that drift effect, or, that perpetual motion, if you will. There's still force behind it. And then, it'll kind of dissipate. And then of a morning, and I was watching this morning, matter of fact, as the sun got more overhead, the thermals were heating up. Like 7:30, 7:45 this morning, my thermals were still falling really close to my tree stand. So I had a pretty stiff wind. So my milkweed, so to speak, was going, a certain direction. The wind would die down, but the milkweed continued to float in that direction. But when it died down with no power behind it, it was interesting because the sun hadn't heated up the forest floor right where I was at. It wasn't overhead enough. My thermals were still kind of falling. It was still colder down there. So it would literally suck that milkweed straight down to the ground. It was, and I was kind of playing with it, timing it just right to do it in that that I don't know what to call it, that lag of wind, in between gusts. And whenever that milkweed would run out of drift, run out of power behind it, the thermals would pull it directly to the forest floor, which is interesting to know what was going on, but it also was very alarming to me because it was like, this isn't good. I mean, I'm trying to, get a deer within 25 yards of me, and I'm watching my scent just drop right, where they're going to be standing type of deal. So,
yeah.
When you start paying attention to that stuff, it's very helpful. Back in my early days, I used to build fires and study fire and smoke, and I would basically create like a smoke map, an overlay over top of my maps, because I hunted such steep terrain that, just because it would say the wind out of the west, it necessarily wouldn't hunt like it was out of the west. It may hunt like it was out of the southeast or the northeast, just because of the editing effect. So yeah, I would build fires on my platforms in like coffee cans, in the off season, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening, on the same wind direction, and then do the same thing on a different wind direction. And you'd be amazed at what you would learn, how smoke, how the air currents, float around your tree stand, on different wind direction days and different times of day as well. Yeah. And then also how, like I say, clumps of trees or rocks or a hillside could cause the eddying effect. So, wind out of the north, your smoke's going to the south of you, then all of a sudden, catch a ravine or catch a big clump of trees and start eddying and, spin right around you and end up 50 yards to the north of you again, and do that all over again. Interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I've heard, like Neil and Craig Doherty have talked about doing that kind of thing a lot, developing that wind map. And it makes so much sense, but it does seem like a tremendous amount of work to go out there and map all of that. But I guess once you have that information, once you know what it does, and maybe you pick your handful of top spots, and then you make assumptions based on, okay, we get most of our winds during hunting season, maybe northwest and west, so I'll go map those things out. If that's at least a good starting point. It seems like a great way to do it. You also, I think I've heard you say, you can use those little like fireworks smoke bombs and stuff to achieve the same thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I would buy those things out every time I saw them on sale. They used to make different sizes of them. The little ones I don't think they do, they're like little cherry bombs or whatever. They don't put off enough smoke, but they used to make bigger ones. And then, when I traveled, through different states and they have those fireworks stands, I always stop, and then they make them all sorts of different colors, but the bigger the better because they last longer. And like I say, if that doesn't work, I've used those jet boil packs. I've used coffee canned. I've burned just about everything you can burn on a platform of a tree stand. But you're right as far as it's very time consuming. But the idea is, I think the learning lesson from that is, because I don't do it anymore. I mean, I've done it a little bit just to test some hypothesis type of deal. But the idea is to get an understanding for it. And then, like you say, pick those certain spots or those certain situations where that you're not going to run in, because you can eliminate those areas. That's what I think I've probably taken from it the most was there's just some spots I don't hunt anymore, no matter how great the sign looks. And again, it depends on what age class of deer you're hunting too. I think has a big, there's a big difference between a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and even a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. So, there's a lot of components that go into that. I wouldn't expect everybody to run out and go, oh, I have to do it this way. How often, how much of the season do you have to devote to hunting? Like if your season's, 6.5 weeks, like in Pennsylvania, and you've only have a couple weekends here and there and a couple vacation days, well, don't not hunt because the wind direction isn't suitable for your spot. Find another spot, or go enjoy the day anyway, type of deal. So there's a lot of factors in there that go into how often you can hunt, the property you're hunting, and then I think probably one of the most important things is the age class of deer you're trying to hunt as well. If you're really trying to target on a specific buck that is 4 or 5, plus, then you should probably pay attention to those details and put the odds in your favor as much as you can.
Yeah. So I want to make sure, and further, make sure I don't forget to do this. I want to make sure that we come back and talk about some of these stands that you end up writing off as saying, or stands or areas that you just find out you can't hunt because of something to do with the wind. But I want to rewind a little bit to just kind of set the stage a little bit better for people that maybe are new to some of these concepts. So you talked about how you're paying attention, excuse me, you're paying attention to wind and thermals and currents, but I want to like understand this in the context of like an example, so I can see like how you think about these things. So maybe could you use today's hunt, because you were out hunting this morning, as you just alluded to. Could you tell us what you were thinking about leading into that hunt? So maybe this morning when you were planning where to go or why you were going to hunt or anything like that. Can you explain to us how you thought about those three things: wind, thermals, current, and what aspects of that you were thinking about to choose where to go, when to go, how to hunt today? And then maybe walk us through the hunt and how things ended up impacting things.
Yeah. Actually, today was my first sit of the season, and I'd just been, busy with work and everything. We were extremely hot. I think last week we were pushing 90 degrees a couple of days, beginning of last week, like last weekend and the last week. The week before last, not just the other day. And I think Thursday a front came in, and literally like within about 36 hours, we had like a 35 to 40 degree temperature difference. And as you know, it just, when you have that big change, when you go from one constant, a big change, and start into another constant, that really gets deer on their feet, especially in October, middle of October. So was really looking forward to trying to, just find a time to get out here this week. And I was watching the weather, and, I knew this morning was going to be my only morning. And I went and pulled my cards on Sunday, and one of the biggest buck on the farm I'm hunting, he was just everywhere. He had been prancing around all week last week in the daylight. Obviously, when that big temperature change kicked in, I had most of my cameras on scrapes, and he was at about all of them. And I know him well for the last 2 years. He's a 5-year-old. And I purposely stayed away from him today because the wind was going to, like I say, be, steady of around 15 and gusting up to around 25. And it has some topography to it, the farm that I hunt, and the stands where I know he was frequenting, the areas, his core area, when I say, home core area, was in an area that the winds will swirl on you when they get to being pushed around that much, that high of wind. And I didn't want to go in there and risk having him out doing his thing and winding me. So I literally went to a stand from one end of the farm to the other, is probably as far as you can get. It might be a mile even. It's a pretty big place, but it's probably, between a quarter and a half mile from the center of his core area. It's basically just the fringes, but it's a really good spot. I call it the inside corner, sometimes the corner pocket. It's an oak flat on a corner of I planted some Egyptian wheat and some other native grasses in there, about a 5-acre field, and it's just got a lane around it, and it's the perfect little pinch of this oak flat kind of comes to this inside bend on a steep ridge. And I went there thinking, I'm going to stay out of that dude's area. Just be great to get out and have a sit and, kind of get the season started. It was a really nice cool morning, 42 degrees, but the wind was high. And also, I was hoping to get a doe, fill a doe tag type of deal. But the first and only deer I saw this morning at 8:02 coming up this ridge, working this scrape line, was that buck, like, oh no. And instantly, as soon as I saw him, I started to get worried because he was very nonchalant. I watched him work 4 or 5 scrapes, maybe in a matter of 60 yards. And I mean, he was really getting into them, kicking out the scrapes, making rubs, working the overhanging branches. And, he was just coming right up the chute, and literally the funnel he was in really narrows down like 13 yards from me. And when I got into the stand, there was a fresh scrape about, I don't know, less than 6-7 yards from the base of my tree. So, and he was on that direct course, and he was coming, he was going to work those scrapes. And I just, as I mentioned earlier, I had just before that was, doing the milkweed thing and watching the milkweed and my thermals pull that milkweed straight to the ground, inside the 10-yard line of my tree. And it was like my, worst case scenario. I was excited to see it. He's heading right at me, but I knew that it was only a matter of time until he turned inside out there. and he kept working his way up, and he got to a scrape that was it was actually 24 and a half yards. I ranged it later, but he was severely quartered too. It was almost coming right at me. And what happens on this, how this funnel lays, it kind of bends around, and I'm like right on the bend. So when he leaves that scrape, he's actually going to go in behind my tree like 10, 11 yards, and then he's going to be like quartering away, 12, 13 yards to get to this other scrape. So it was going to work kind of perfectly, but because of my thermals, the wind it wasn't going towards him, it was paralleling him. But those thermals being pulled down to the ground and those big gusts, they were just creating havoc. I just knew that. And, I knew better, I guess, like I said before, I probably shouldn't have been hunting on that trying to kill a buck, but I was staying away from him, wanted to shoot a doe, and also just wanted to be out there and enjoying it. So I'm kind of holding my bow, and I'm just like, well, maybe this will work. And at this point, I'm starting to pray a little bit, like, man, this might just actually work. If this wind just keeps down long enough, and maybe he's not going to pay attention to all the details, and he's just doing his thing, and whatever. But yeah, he took a couple steps out of that scrape heading my way, and it was like he hit a wall. And I mean, I literally, his posture immediately changed. He didn't blow out of there like I thought he would have. He kind of, he moved his head around a little bit and I could see him moving his nose to try to catch what he thought was my wind, and he must have moved it just right in one instance, because he turned and took two big hops and put some distance between me and him, and he stopped again, and at that point he was maybe 40, 45 yards, but there was some brush, and then he just literally just kind of changed direction and just walked straight down over the hill and got out of there. But that was the scenario this morning. I kind of knew that going into there with those high winds, and again, that's the difference between the Midwest. A lot of times, a lot of those deer in the Midwest, that high, steady wind, they like that sense of comfort, knowing that their nose is always keeping them safe. But when you add topography to it and you get those gusts and that wind starts to swirl because of, like where I was, there was a steep ridge basically to the south of me. So I just had swirling winds. It can work against you. And a lot of times I think that's that sixth sense. I'm sure we've all heard, when you're talking around a group of hunters and somebody will say, those deer, especially those older ones, they just have that sixth sense. I don't know. The more I do this, I like to think that sixth sense is just those deer really, really knowing, how to use the terrain and the wind in their favor all the time. And then the hunter not completely understanding what's going on around in that sixth sense. Like, if your thermals are on a rise or on a fall in the morning of an evening and adding air currents and stuff, why your scent actually went to that deer's nose. I think that's that sixth sense that we see.
Yeah. So I want to kind of unpackage a bunch of things that you talked about there. Let's talk about topography first. Can you explain or give us some examples of how different kinds of topography will mess with the wind? The one that stands out to me always is like if you're down in a bottom, like if you're down and low, there's that swirling. Can you elaborate on that and any other kind of topographic features that seem to have a consistent effect or something that you always keep an eye out for or aware of?
Yeah, sure. And it changes throughout the time of the year because of sun position, right? Especially when you're talking topography and thermals. A north-facing slope gets less sunlight in November than it does July, if that makes any sense, because the sun's overhead. So, and the north-facing slope is always your coldest facing. So that's the one that always sticks out to me. When you're hunting a north-facing slope, it usually, especially, we as deer, tree stand deer hunters, end of October, say through Thanksgiving, depending on how steep that hill is and how high on the hill or low you're on the hill, it may be 9, 10 o'clock in the morning before the sun is up high enough, or even later, to change those thermals. So, and I learned that through bad experience. A really good scenario here was, if you can picture this, a ridge line running east to west, on the west side of the ridge line, on the east side of it to the northeast was like a bowl almost of a thicket, just every little nasty thing you could think in there, maybe encompass 20 acres or so. And I just knew that, I didn't really call it a bedding area, but deer stayed there. There's just always doe groups around there and everything. And this ridgeline, ran east to west from this bedding area. And so the deer would come from the west, basically like it kind of angled. So they would come from the northwest across this north-facing slope, if you will, if you can follow me, and then, heading to scent check this doe bedding area, as I called it, or whatever, on a northeast wind. And I had hunted this. I was about 3/4 of the way up on this ridge, and as I was scouting it, there was a seepage or a drainage that came out of this ridge line that basically forced movement around it, up it, so that the deer walking across the hill, they would come to this big drainage, it was just seeping out of this north-facing slope. And rather than cross, it was rather steep. They would just, over time, all the trails just funneled around the top of it. It was like a no-brainer. When you knew what was going on, you hang on, the south side of that, and, it funnels all the deer around you type of deal. On a northeast wind, it would only make sense that a buck could scent check that doe bedding area, just with his nose, from 75 yards away type of deal. So I hung a stand there and, couldn't wait for that first northeast, and I got in there, and the wind's out of the northeast, and every deer that first morning, I'll never forget this, to the north of me was blowing. It was a bunch of does and little ones, and, they're, 30 yards, 20 yards, to the north of me, and, they're just hitting my wind. And I'm like, the wind's out of the north. There's no way they should be smelling me. And I hadn't tested it. I'm like, what in the world's going on here? This was probably, 10 years ago. And finally, I went back in with the whole fire deal. I'm like, I got to figure this out. And, built a fire. And what was happening was there were light wind days. And again, wind speed has a lot to do with it. I like to think, I don't know, I've never really measured, but somewhere over 8 miles an hour. Wind gets kind of forceful, so it forces your scent or whatever in the direction it's coming from. So it's basically pushing it with enough force that it'll get it there. But when it's less than that, a lot of times, your scent or that air becomes heavy, and it just kind of, gravity takes its toll, if you will, especially on those cold thermals that are pulling, towards the Earth's surfaces. And that was this exact occasion. It was, one of those cold, crisp November mornings with hardly any wind at all. Very overcast type of day. So I call that heavy air, very heavy air type of day. And the sun was up, but it wasn't up high enough to where it was, reaching the forest floor on that part of the north-facing slope. So my thermals were, working as if it were of an evening. My thermals, my scent, coming out of my body, if you will, or when I built the fire, it's going up a little bit, but it was cooling down rather quickly because air temperature was cold. So the smoke's cooling down. And as it cooled down, it would go to the north a little bit with a north wind direction. The smoke would go to the north a little ways, but once it got cool enough and those thermals started pulling it, it would literally, pull it to the ground and then suck it, back down to the bottom, which would be to the north of me. So that's what my scent was doing. If you think of yourself as a little fire, constantly putting off smoke, it's going the right direction for, the certain amount of time, but once that air cools down, once it cools it down, from your body temperature, and those thermals pull down towards the Earth's surfaces, and then it's going to go, you think of scent or that smoke just as water on a hillside, and even fog, if you will. Fog always lays in the lowest parts of the fields. If you're driving around in the early morning and at a cool morning, you look where the fog is, it's always just like water, where water would pull up, fog pulls up. And that's usually, the lowest, coolest spot. And that's what your scent does. And I learned, I still hunt that fence line. I call it the North Ridge stand. But I purposely set a stand about 80 yards from it that I hunt until about 9:30, 20 to 10, somewhere in there. And then I get down and sneak over into that stand and get up in it, around 10 o'clock, if you will. The sun's usually high enough and the thermals are now going again back up the hill, and it puts everything, right into my favor. Those deer that are scent checking that ridge line, on a north wind, my thermals are going upwards and, to the south like they should be up over the hill type of deal. And I've actually shot deer from that stand, shot bucks out of that stand, getting in at 9:40, and I think the earliest I shot one at 20 after 10 one time. I've shot them at 11, I think one in the afternoon one time. But it was definitely an eye opener for me. It definitely worked. So to answer your question, that's one of the like you say, the topography, the low spots, and those north-facing slopes, and those spots with water. As I said, you can use some of the wind and the thermals and such to eliminate stand locations, and I've all but eliminated the low ones, but it takes the perfect scenario for me to get into a low stand, and usually it has to have water around it. Water can get me can do a lot, get your scent where you want. It cools down the air around you, so it's going to pull your thermals down to the stream, and then right out with the flowing current almost, so your scent will stay right with the water type of deal.
Okay. I'm finding myself being pulled in like 7 different directions at once. I'm trying to keep
sometimes you have to stop me because I get going. So just stop me.
It's perfect. It's perfect because you're laying down all the different things I'm interested in. You're like kind of putting them out there for me. I'm just trying to choose which apple to pick off the tree. So one of the things I kind of struggle with sometimes is knowing how to like rank or prioritize wind direction versus the thermal, and knowing like when one is going to trump the other. And I think you kind of mentioned your threshold, but I want to make sure I'm clear on this. Are you saying that if you have a wind direction of more than 8 miles an hour or so, that's probably going to trump a thermal effect, so that in that case you wouldn't be so much worried about the thermal sucking you down if you had like 12 or 13 or 15 mile an hour wind blowing you in a certain direction? Is that right, or correct me on that?
Yeah, so put it on, when you have those perfect crisp bluebird mornings, but not bluebird, but low wind, there's just hardly any noise in the woods. So low wind speed, thermals really come into play. But usually on those crisp, cool bluebird mornings, I call those light air days. I call them heavy air and light air. But when you have that high pressure, your thermals, or your scent, your thermals, I like to think of it, we grew up in the north, and, when you go past people's homes in January and they have a chimney and the stovepipe comes out of the top of their roof and they have a fire and the stovepipe's like 10 inches, and you ever see the smoke out of those stovepipes, like keep a 10-inch or maybe just go out to 20 inches around, but it just goes straight up in the air for almost as high as you can see. That's those really light air days. There's nice, beautiful high pressure days, and your thermals are just going straight up. So your scent's almost like in that stovepipe. It's just going straight up. Those are the days that, again, that sixth sense, that you can almost get away with just about anything. But then when on the flip side, when you have those heavy air days, when everything's being pushed down to the ground, and you can again see those days, just build a fire in your yard a few times, a year, and watch what the smoke does. When your neighbors are 4 or 5 doors down coughing because you're burning leaves in your yard, those are heavy air days, and that's exactly what your scent will be doing. So it's forced down, and those are the days that wind speed comes into play, because if those heavy air days are forcing your scent to to stay within whatever 10, 15, 20 feet of the earth's surface, then you need wind speed from a direction to move your scent where you need it to go. Hopefully, your tree stand's positioned to where you're on the downwind side of wherever deer are going to walk, and you need your scent to go that way. So you obviously need wind speed to push it there on those heavy air days.
Okay. That makes sense. So high pressure days are when you're typically going to get that air blowing up, pulling your scent up and out and away, so you can get away with a little more. And also, we oftentimes hear the high pressure days are days that deer like to move a little bit more too. So that's kind of a double positive there. On the flip side,
right,
you got the low pressure days, which usually are coming in with a front, like at the beginning of a front, right? You got a big storm front moving through or something. That's going to be what you're calling a heavy air day. It's pushing things down. It's going to make things a little more difficult unless you do have that higher wind speed that's going to, as you said, push the wind where you need it, your scent where you need it. So that all makes sense to me now, I think. Now, this is a slight pivot, but when it comes to wind speed and deer movement, do you see any certain threshold of below this speed they tend to like it or don't like it, or above this speed they like it or don't like it? Do you have anything there that you like to key in on?
Yeah. Well, I think it varies regionally for the hunter. You probably have a lot of listeners who are in upstate New York, hunting big woods. I and I grew up in areas like that, and I've also hunted, Iowa. So it definitely, in my opinion, varies regionally, and definitely topography has a lot to do with that. But in the big woods, when you have, big mature, red oak and maple forest and stuff, and that wind speed picks up and it stays a constant, and those treetops are banging together, and you have swirling winds because of the ridges and the valleys. To me, deer tend to move less. Now, on the flip side, or on the other coin of that spectrum, and I've heard, when you've had more Drury on how he likes higher wind speed, but I think that has a lot to do with it's a constant. It's coming from a certain direction. They can feed and bed with their nose in a certain position to cover, their backside. Deer is a prey animal. Basically is just trying to do everything to stay alive. So that would make sense that if it's being a constant, that then they can always monitor that. But when it starts to swirl around, and then you throw in the banging tops of trees and stuff that is now giving them another trigger to their ears, to be alarmed to, I think it adds a little stress to them. And when they're stressed, they tend to move less. So I think that would definitely depend on, what part of the country you're hunting in. For me, where I'm hunting now, today was a perfect example. It was a high wind day, and it was, steady 12 to 16 or 17 and gusting, 25, 30. And it was just the buck I saw, he was actually moving, it was 8 o'clock. It was actually before the wind really started to pick up heavy. About, as the sun got higher, the wind, obviously gained speed, and around 9:30. I mean, it was just, it was just a bunch of nonsense, really. It was just wasting my time. I didn't even see a doe.
Huh. Interesting. Let's go back to what you were talking about 2 seconds ago then, which was water. And you alluded to that was, utilizing water as almost like a thermal pool was something that you would think about in certain situations that would allow you to get away with hunting in like a low spot, like a bottom or a creek bottom or something like that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how water impacts all this stuff, thermals, wind currents, etc.?
Yeah.
And then elaborate on how you use that?
Yeah, definitely. It's on an evening. As I mentioned before, I hunt higher in topography as much as I can because obviously that's more constant. But when you start talking to different bow hunters and stuff, especially early season, there's a lot of people that do a lot of evening hunts. It makes sense, food to bed, and then in the evening, that's when they do most of it. But topography to me plays a big role in that, especially when you start dealing with older age class deer. And I dawned on this or stumbled across it just watching deer from long distance. I was watching a mature buck one time. He kept coming out in a field before season. So this is like mid-September, feeding in the beans type of deal. And he would come out in the same spot on a certain wind direction all the time, almost religiously. And he would never, other deer would feed, within, a couple hundred yards of him, but he stayed within a 30 or 40 yard circle. He would never really leave that circle. And at the time he was either 4 or 5 year old. I can't remember, but what it was he was feeding. Eventually later, I figured this out. He was feeding, obviously with his head down, it was clover, and it was of an evening, every evening, and he was basically in an area where all the topography was pulling all the scent from around him. The thermals were cooling down. He was in a low spot, and he just stayed in that low spot because he could feed with his nose, head to the ground, nose to the ground, look up every now and again, but basically have all facets covered because he was in one of the lowest spots around him. And I was thinking about trying to get in there and hunt that deer, and where he was feeding was really close to his bedding area where I assumed he was bedding. And the only spot I could get into was if I walked a creek bottom up, and it had water. When I'm talking about the water temperatures is what causes this. And everybody has probably stood next to a stream, and it's just always, more chilly down there. It's colder next to the water. That's a positive for you if you're trying to, if your tree stands close to that water, then that cooler air temperature in and around that water, especially of an evening as thermals are falling, will funnel your scent, to the water, and then whatever direction the water current's going, if your wind speed's not too high. And usually in the evening is when wind speed starts to die down. Again, that would not be the case if you had stronger wind speed, forcing your scent a certain direction. But if you had, 3, 4, 5 miles an hour wind, really cooler temperatures in that water, and you can literally sit next to the stand I'm thinking about now. I could take you there, and you could sit next to it and feel the temperature difference. And I was able to sneak up that creek bottom, with the water in it, get out within 5 or 6 yards of the creek bank, and into the stand type of deal, and shoot that deer. He in his mind, I think he was, as safe as he could be, but I just found that one little area where I could get in there and him not be aware of my presence. And it was because of that stream for sure.
Do you have anything like that when you're hunting near big bodies of water, like hunting next to a lake or a really large pond or anything? Is there any kind of weird current or thermal effect with that? I don't know if I have ever thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I have either. I've never really hunted next to a big lake. I have hunted closer to some ponds, but I would think, just thinking about it, it would have to be a bigger pond, because I think the stagnant water, especially, they kind of hold heat, like a swimming pool holds heat, but a stream, moving water, especially in a mountainous region, is cold water, where the trout live. That's really cold water type of deal. It would make sense if it would definitely change it, but it might actually change in reverse. If it was a pond that would, like a swimming pool, sometimes if you jump in, you have an in-ground swimming pool, and air temperature of a morning or an evening is colder than the water temperature, so the pool actually holds heat sometimes, depending on what's around it, I guess, and how much sunlight it gets. So there would be a lot of variables there, but I could definitely see it, it'd be something worth looking into. I never really studied it.
So here's another thermal scenario I'm curious on your thoughts about. This is one I've heard some other guys talk about that hunt some hilly country, talking about what they call a thermal tunnel, where basically you've got a situation where you have imagine a ridge, and you've got the wind blowing over the ridge, and you also, though, have a thermal rising. So we're going to say it's late in the morning or in the afternoon when the wind or the thermals are coming from the bottom, coming up the ridge, but you have a wind direction that's coming from the opposite side of the ridge, and it's hitting that thermal, creating almost a tunnel effect. You've got thermal hitting a wind direction. Typically, I've heard about this being about 3/4 of the way up the ridge line, and then this spinning tunnel of wind. Supposedly, the theory being that this location, about 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way up a ridge, because of that effect, bucks sometimes like to run that height on the ridge, try to take advantage of that. Have you heard of that before? Or if not, does that make sense? Have you seen anything like that? What do you think about that theory?
I have heard of that, and I've heard it talked a lot out west with the elk hunters. But I've never really played with it. I have heard it does make sense a little bit, but I think it would have to do with wind. It would have a lot to do with wind speed, depending on how much force is behind the wind, whether that would take effect or not.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Does any of this stuff with thermals matter when we're not in country with a bunch of ridges and hills? I mean, if I'm in flat ground can be, let's say middle of Illinois or something like that, do you need to worry about this stuff as much?
Sure. Just like today, you don't want you want your thermals on a rise, especially if you're hunting from a tree stand. Even 15, 20 feet can make a difference. If you're in a tree stand 20 feet and you're a bow hunter, hunting a specific deer, trying to get them within a specific, yardage, you don't want if you're expecting the deer, and where I would call it this morning, like close quarters, that's a good example. If the deer continued on, he's going to end up, 12, 13 yards, maybe even closer. So when your thermals are, going straight to the ground, I mean, he's basically a ground zero. You have to have everything right. So yeah, topography or not, if your thermals are going straight to the ground and you're expecting a deer to be that close, if you want to shoot that deer, I would suggest shooting him before he gets that close, because, he may not smell you at 30 yards, but he's probably definitely going to smell you at 10. And turn inside out once he does, because he's going to know he's right on top of you type of deal, or basically right underneath you.
Yeah. I've heard you.
But when.
So I was going to say that I've heard you talk about these kind of days like that, where you've got a low pressure, so a heavy air day, that pushes your scent down. And if you don't have a lot of wind, you essentially create like a pool of scent around you that just kind of lingers there. And in the context of that situation, you were talking about if you've got a scenario like that and you're in the rut, you wouldn't hunt all day like many other people would say because you just are creating this scent pool. Is that right? Did I hear that right? Do you avoid all-day sits in a scenario like that?
Yeah, I do. And, that's funny doing the show scene. And, I feel like in January when we're all out there doing shows, you talk to every deer hunter in North America. And I've always found it fascinating how many people sit from daylight to dark in the same tree stand at all different facets of weather. Sometimes I would say that that's fine and probably would suggest it, but there are other times, especially those heavy air days, when I think just that. I think of myself as, like I said, I build fires. I think of myself as a fire constantly putting off smoke. And if I don't have wind speed and thermals taking my scent or that smoke into a direction where I want it to go, I am just, constantly saturating my area. I would just only imagine that it would just, the pool of scent would just increase and get larger and larger and larger. Basically it's, 20 yard saturation from my stand, 30 yard, 40 yard, 50 yard. And eventually if I've sat there 8, 9, 10 hours and I've not had wind speed to move, to clean the area out type of deal, and I've had, a low pressure day, heavy air day, and everything's just falling to the ground, I would, and I've kind of tested that theory, not specifically set out to do it, but sat areas where I knew that was going on, really good areas, and have sat there and just not seen deer. I guess the argument could be, well, how do you know you would have seen deer if it was a better day? And I don't know that, but you do that so many times, the likelihood is if you go, if you know the area and you know how many deer you have and you know what's going on around you, and if you're not seeing deer on those types of days, the likelihood is, I would think, it really makes sense, knowing how well they smell, that's probably why. So those days, I definitely try to get to an area where I call it my dead zone, where I know that I try to get my scent to pull in an area where I don't expect any deer to be or come from, or I just chalk it up as if they get there, then I'm busted, and that's part of the game type of deal.
Yeah. So we talked about all these scenarios now where we're thinking about trying to manage where our scent is going, where our smoke is going. And so we've talked about ways that we can think about thermals to our advantage. We've talked about ways that we can use wind direction to our advantage. What about actual tools or products that can help us deal with this? So there's a bajillion different scent control products out there. Ozone, sprays, cover scents, yada, yada, yada. From your experience thinking about this and putting a lot of these things to the test, do any of those things work really well to combat some of the wind issues? Or is there anything that you recommend over another, or thoughts on that in general?
Well, I've never fooled with the Ozonics, and not because I'm a naysayer, just basically because I just didn't really want to spend the money on them. I do keep all my clothes in scent-free tubs. I wash them in scent-free detergent. I spray down. Sometimes I even put, a little bit of cover scent on my boots type of deal. I keep my boots in separate tubs. I dress, when I get out of my truck in the morning, I have a little mat I stand on, I dress. I go through all those. I think it makes sense. I try to keep the foreign smells to as minimum as I can, but I rely more on trying to understand the wind direction and just keeping my scent from getting to their nose. I really feel like, knowing how well they smell, I feel like no matter what you're doing, if your scent, of a human gets to a deer's nose, they're going to know it. Now, how they react to it is the difference. I've hunted urban areas, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, deer are just used to human smell. They're used to, they're almost a different animal from some of the deer I grew up hunting in the big woods of Pennsylvania. So you can get away with some of that stuff. And I think even a step further, I think some deer just have different personalities. I don't know if I'd ever have a way of proving this, but I just saw some deer, older deer, just didn't seem like they cared, and then other deer, the littlest thing sets them off. Just like some deer, last year I was hunting a buck that was a 4 and a 5-year-old, and he reacted so negatively to, the grunt, the wheeze, or rattling antlers. I mean, literally, if I grunted at him, if I wheezed at him or rattled antlers at him, he turned around and ran the other direction. And he was one of the oldest deer on the farm and one of the biggest. I think it was his personality. I don't know what it is. Maybe he was beat up a lot as a kid. I don't know. But it was, and other deer, it just on the flip side, I've had 2-year-olds, that come in all bristled up and just challenge you. So I do believe that they have personalities. And I think some deer are more tolerant to things when they smell it. Some get curious. I've had deer follow my scent trail, to the tree where you would think they would turn around and run, and especially more so does than bucks. But they're very curious. They want to know, what's going on over there. Where is this thing at that I'm smelling? I don't think they necessarily associate it with danger, but it's something that they want to investigate. I think time of year has a lot to do with it too. Early season when they haven't been hunted or pressured, throughout the summer, I think their guard may be a lot lower on their, a lot further down on the scale of what they alert to. And then, you enter into 5 or 6 weeks of bow season and followed by a gun season. And before you know it, like in Michigan or Pennsylvania, 1 million hunters have been in the woods. They're just triggered by the smallest thing. So I think, Tommy, late season is way different than the early season as far as a lot of those alarming factors, if you will.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen a lot of the same things there. So further, I wanna get your thoughts over there, because for me, this whole topic of wind and understanding it, this is definitely one of those light bulb moments for me too. And I unfortunately hunted for like 18 years or something before I really started paying attention to wind the way I should have. I probably would have done a whole lot better as a teenager if I was sharpened up on this. But when I finally did, things start clicking. Now, you're more of an adult onset hunter, late teenager onset hunter. When you're hearing all this stuff from Ryan, where are your questions still at, or what aren't we covering that you're curious about?
I mean, you've hit on a ton of stuff, and you got to have like a notebook or something with all these specific scenarios for different stands, because I don't know how you keep this all straight. But I didn't start really thinking about thermals, Mark, until, it was probably on our elk hunt a couple of years ago, when we were talking about strategy and where we wanted to be in the morning and in the afternoon, and then I kind of started thinking about that for deer hunting, but definitely not to the level that I should be. And I'm kind of having aha moments right now talking with you, Ryan, about the place we hunted in Ohio. There's just so many different scenarios that you're talking about. Like, oh, that's why that buck did that, or that's why that doe, winded me there, or, even the buck that I shot last year, he came in right where he should have, and I had a perfect wind, but he knew something was up. And I'm just I want to go back and look at historical weather data, because I think it was a calm day. And, just thinking right now, he could have very well, caught my scent just because of the thermals. So yeah, it's like fascinating stuff. One thing I wanted to touch on, Mark, you kind of asked my question about, us flatlanders here, and like, where I'm hunting in Southeast Michigan, we don't have a ton of topography. Other than water, Ryan, are there any like other sort of natural features in flatter areas that could have an effect on your thermals or the wind current? What are those kind of things that you're looking for in the flat areas?
In the flat, I mean, it could be any structure in the flat areas. I know where you're talking about. Those islands of trees could definitely alter wind current, air current, if you will. So if you got a big, you're talking about, some of the ag areas where you have, a 200-acre cornfield and then, a 10-acre stand of oaks or, what have you. Those areas could definitely alter the air current for sure. So any structure, anything that is rising above the Earth's surface, and would allow, just like water, if you had a giant hose and were to stand back and spray water on it, however it would deflect or reflect that water, whatever could do that to the air would, will in fact do it. The difference being out there is it's only going to do it for a little bit at a time. What I mean is, like, if it would deflect or deflect the air, it would get back to its normal course rather quickly, because it's not bouncing off of, 5 different things, like in a region of high topography. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I got you. Cool.
So if do you have a follow-up question, Josh, or should I pivot to another question?
No, I think I'm good there. I think I'm good. I need to spend more time building fires and tree stands.
Please don't do that on any of the farms I hunt during the season.
As Mark
I'll get in there and start a fire to let you know how to go.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of time, and that's all stuff I did, before I had any sense of responsibility. As my mom used to say at the time, she would just shake her head all the amount of time I was wasting trying to figure out how to shoot a deer, and then she would say, "Oh, why do you think these things are so smart? I hit them in my car all the time."
Yeah. I hate that when they say that kind of thing. It's not quite that easy to do. So speaking of how it's not quite so easy, here's the crux of the deal, though, I feel like, for a lot of guys when we start targeting these mature deer. One of these big first aha moments for a lot of us is understanding, oh, wow, the wind is really important because deer have these incredible noses, and we got to make sure they don't smell us. So step one is figuring out how to try to keep deer from smelling us. Step two seems to be, though, how do you understand how a mature buck uses the wind to his advantage? Because, right, that seems to happen a lot. And then with that knowledge, how do you hunt him? So how do you manage to keep this buck from smelling you, but also be in the place where he wants to be because of the wind that he's trying to use to his advantage? That's like the crux of the whole deal. Can you talk about, I guess the first step being how you see mature deer using the wind? Are there any consistent things like mature bucks tend to want the wind doing X, or when they're going to bed, they tend to Y, or anything like that as far as how you see mature bucks tending to want to use the wind or use terrain to take advantage of wind?
Yeah. And again, I can never say never, right? Because there's almost a never, how that works. It's just, there's always something, that's going to throw a variable there. So I'll say this. When we say mature deer, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Some mature deer are 3, some don't call mature deer until they're 5. And I think with each age class, each extra year they have from 3 on, they gain just a little more knowledge. But on the flip side, I think the older they get, the less they move too. So let's say older, from after they start getting 5, in my experience, I've noticed that their home ranges become smaller, their core areas, and they move less but more deliberate. So for the most part, I like to say, and again, there's always somebody out there, oh no, I remember this one time. But yeah, anything can happen in the wild. But for the most part, in my experiences, the mature deer, older age class deer tend to move. I think they like to move with the wind quartering at their rear. So basically, if you think of, the cone shape, when it gets to their nose, if it's quartering to their rear, like that gives them the biggest sense of security with their nose, and then they obviously can see what's in front of them. And how I used to study this, and that's actually how Barry and Gene did this back in the 70s. They cued me onto this, but this would be late season or in the wintertime. And again, Pennsylvania, we had plenty of snow. In Michigan, you could do this, but I would purposely walk around and try to jump a mature buck in its bed, right? And then track it backwards. So when I knew it entered its bed undisturbed, and then followed its hoof prints in reverse and saw how they maneuvered from wherever they came from, feet, or used this ridge line to get to here, and this, that, and the other, and how they used, how the wind was blowing that day. So there's a ton of information to be learned from their tracks. And if you have a compass and know what the wind did that day or the day before, and how they used the wind to get to where they were going, type of deal. And it was really, I learned probably more on that with mature buck move, doing, that type of deal. And I did that I still do that. That's, it's kind of like my early shed hunting if I get out in, January, February type of deal. But, purposely looking for, even if I don't jump a buck, you can tend to see a buck bed over a doe bed. If it may be a little bit bigger, some of the urine marks in the snow and stuff. I just track them backwards just to see how they were moving. Younger bucks, the 1.5 years and the 2.5, they seem to be very sporadic, just kind of all over the place. Like, and I equate it to humans, if you will, like a 1.5 old buck, I kind of equate to like a 13-year-old boy to a 19-year-old boy. I mean, think of how active you were in that time frame. And then a 2-year-old buck, a 2.5-year-old buck would be like a 20 or 30. You're still pretty active. You still have that immatureness to you, but you still, kind of settled in your ways a little bit. And then obviously 30 and 40, you're just getting more set on your ways. You tend to move less, you don't go to the gym as much, so you're getting heavier. And 40 to 50 would be your 4.5-year-olds, same type of thing. And then I noticed their core areas getting smaller. I noticed their bedding areas becoming closer together. I did notice they bedded in different areas. I was really surprised, one buck in particular. And he did this for a couple years in a row. He bedded right next to the highway. And he tended to only do it in gun season. And it was in Pennsylvania, and he was literally at the time, would have been a really nice buck. I mean, nice buck anytime, but then there wasn't a lot, he was an 11 point, like, I don't know, probably right at 140. And I had killed a buck with my bow that season. And, you get one buck in Pennsylvania, you're done type of deal. So I was, sitting the bench in gun season. And I actually was, just out riding around the first morning of gun season, like opening day of gun season in PA is a huge deal. And it was just like right at daylight. And I actually caught this buck going into his bedding area. I watched him bed down, snow on, I could see him. And I rode past him 4 days in a row. He was still laying in the same spot. Obviously he probably got up at nighttime, but he went back there to bed 4 days in a row. And then on the last Saturday, our gun season's 2 weeks, he was still there on the last Saturday. So he had found that little spot, and I never saw him there again ever after that. And then the following year, I purposely went and watched for that deer just to see. And it was in a pretty high pressured area. And lo and behold, that buck a year later was bedding in that same area. So it was fascinating to me how he had found, literally, I'm talking like a half an acre this dude bedded on with the highway to his back. And he just, looked down through the woods type of deal. And it was like almost in a little triangled area. And, he just found a place to be safe. And I don't know if any hunter killed him, because I knew some of the hunters in that area, and I can only imagine that he probably I bet he ended up getting hit by a car, because a lot of deer get hit there, after they would have shed or stuff like that. And it was crazy to me how he knew that road could keep him so safe, yet it was probably what ended up killing him, because I don't think a hunter killed him. I lived right there. I was sure enough had heard about it. But anyway, I learned all that, I would go in there and follow his tracks and see how they moved and such.
That's a great way to do it. That's it's so hard to tell what a buck is thinking or factoring into his movements if you're just like seeing him at point now. Like if you show up, he pops out into a field. And if you try to make assumptions about how he got there, it's really easy to make the wrong assumption without doing what you just said, actually backtracking him. Like that's such a smart way to do it. And obviously you can't do that during hunting season without probably blowing things out to some degree. But that's a really smart idea to do that in the postseason and be able to take those lessons learned and apply them to the future year.
And that's probably why I'm such a poor shed hunter, because I end up doing more of that type of stuff than looking for sheds. But back to each deer has its own individual personality. And, back to, for the majority of hunters out there, if you're not hunting a specific deer to do that to, it's still beneficial to you to know how deer move and just play those odds. The deer you may be hunting may or may not be doing that, but that's okay. If you're still you're stacking the odds in your favor. So, if you can, and again, those aha moments it sounds like a lot. I'm sure to your listeners, that aren't versed in this, they're like, oh my God, this is way too much information. I'm never hunting again. This is crazy. It does sound like a lot. I get that. But if you just start like thinking about it a little bit and piecing it together, and the next time you're on, piece a little more, the next season it's a little more, then all of a sudden it does click, and you can look at the weather station and you see the wind direction, and from past experiences, what this, whatever stand you have on this north ridge of a morning works well, why, and you can position, which way the deer are going to be using that ridge, because historically, traditionally speaking, deer, older age class bucks tend to move this direction. If they come the other way, then that's okay too. But it's all about stacking those odds in your favor, especially if you don't have a specific farm that you can hunt year in and year out, and you're not hunting specific deer.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is definitely one of those advanced topics that we're getting here. We're diving
Definitely,
deep in the
yeah.
weeds. So if you are new, do not feel bad if this is like, whoa, this is a whole lot of crap. At the very basic level, start kind of where you said, Ryan. This is one of those things that as you dive deeper and deeper and deeper, that's when it's okay to start thinking about things to this degree. Do not feel bad for being a little overwhelmed if you're new. That said, though, we're going to continue going down the advanced path for those who are at that point in their hunting journey. So if we're thinking that the deer, as you described, in some way or another are using wind in their favor to move, the issue I always think about then is, okay, if I'm expecting this deer to come to where I'm standing, like if that's what I'm hoping for, right, where I'm sitting in a tree, I'm hoping he's going to come here. But if that happens, and if we believe that a buck is usually going to be moving with the wind some way in his favor so he can understand what's happening to some degree, many times that means that he's going to have the wind blowing towards him, possibly from where I am. Although I guess the scenario you painted is a little bit more rear and quartering, so maybe you can get away with what I'm going to describe a little bit better. What I'm basically trying to get at is, can you talk to me about how you think about setting up in situations where the deer has the wind in their favor, but you also have the wind in your favor? Can you describe how you think about that and lay out how that might work?
So this is where this can get into, the really advanced level and off into the weeds, but there's two ways I hunt. Like if I'm going into, there's two different scenarios and I know what you're saying, but if I'm hunting a specific deer, like I was this morning, or not really hunting that deer, but in that scenario, a deer I know on a farm I know well, and I'm probably not going to shoot any other deer than that type of deer. I try to position myself where my wind is almost wrong, if that makes sense. Because when I know how the deer are using the terrain to get from point A to point B and what they're doing, and let me rewind a little bit, time of year plays a big role in that as well. I'm specifically speaking, from the middle of October to 1st of December. So not this 2 weeks of rut, but when those deer up on their feet, trying to find a girlfriend type of deal for the most part. So they're covering as much ground they can, while they're on their feet, and they're using their nose to do it. If they're older deer, they tend to be lazy, and they're trying to cover as much ground they can to find a receptive doe as quickly as they can and get with that doe, and then enter the lockdown phase or whatever. But so how in my mind, I don't want my wind almost wrong, so almost paralleling. Like it's real close to being wrong, but it's so close to being like you're never going to get it better for getting those deer, inside of that 20-yard line. And rewind, I stumbled on that. I still do. I hunt with a recurve some, but there was 5 or 6 years where I specifically hunted with a recurve. So again, I took that, my 50-yard range limit from a compound down to 20 yards with a recurve. So you just got to figure those spots out. And then also not only the wind direction being almost wrong, but the perfect spot, being a really narrow funnel where you almost kind of have them pinned in there, type of deal. Like when they're there, you've got the wind in your favor and they're inside of your wheelhouse, and they have no idea that they just walked right into the trap type of deal. That's the perfect scenario. But that's for somebody, again, hunting a very specific deer, probably with history with it, and knows the ground really well, and understands how the wind moves around the ground and such. For the most part, when I get asked that question, or if I'm explaining to people like, no, the different way is you're hunting an age class of deer, not a specific deer. So let's just say some of your listeners just want to hunt an older age class deer. So let's just say, we're just looking for 3-year-old deer. We want to kill a nice buck type of deal. Then what I'm trying to do is position myself to where if in my scouting missions or when I'm looking at top-down maps, I'm trying to identify those areas that are going to hold high numbers of deer, does and fawns and such. And then I'm going to look for those key areas, those transition areas that or those hogbacks or funnels or whatever it may be that connect those areas. So you got a bedding area, some call them over here, and you have another one over here. Well, how do they get from there to there? And then I want to look at how can I get to, in between those areas, the most undetectable, and by most undetectable, not walking through their way, but also take it a step further. I think we do a lot of hunters mess up by walking to that perfect spot with in mind that they're going to hunt the perfect wind. But while they were walking there, their scent was blowing to the area that they're expecting the deer to come from. You know, as well as deer smell, I know a lot of people that nudge deer just with scent only, you know, especially out west, Montana, Wyoming. I know guys that do deer nudges, if you will, from a half-mile away, just using their scent. They'll run deer out of blocks of timber just by letting their scent drift into a block of timber. So it's one thing to say, okay, I'm in X tree stand, and I've got everything set in my favor. I expect the deer, you know, to be to the north of me, moving from east to west. The wind is out of the northwest, so my scent's going to the southeast, and this is the perfect transition point between those two spots. But yet they parked, you know, whatever, 300 yards from that area, and that they walked to their stand with the wind blowing right into that area. So I think it's just as important to keep in mind entering and exiting with the wind in your favor, as well as hunting with the wind in your favor. So again, when you're just hunting an age class of deer in that, you know, 5 or 6 week time frame when they're going to be on their feet the most in their life throughout that year, you want to find those areas that they're going to use their nose to check for receptive does, and find those transition points in between those hogbacks and those funnels that connect those areas, those little drainages, those little things, you know, where they narrow down, where you know they're going to walk through, and you can even manipulate that. I've cut trees down, and I've even built snow fence. You know, that orange snow fence they've sell at Lowe's. You can alter movement with that on a big ridge line. You know, I've strung that stuff up throughout the woods, and you know, at an angle. You don't want it on a 90, but at an angle, just like if you were to dump water on it, you know, you want it to go a certain way. Deer would come across that, and they would get to that orange snow fence. It's only like 37 or 30 inches high, 27 inches high. They don't jump over it. It's amazing to me. They come to it, and then they just follow it, you know, like whatever at the angle you have it on, and then you stop it like 18 yards in front of your stand type of deal, and there they are. And you know, maybe check your laws, but I know I did that in Iowa one time, and it's not illegal to do. There was only a 60-yard snow fence, but it altered their movement. So you can do that. And you know, I was hunting with a recurve, so I needed them, you know, in that 20-yard range type of deal. So to reiterate, there's two different styles that I hunt. If I'm hunting a specific deer, you know, I'm really getting advanced level there. You know, I'm going to try to almost have, if I think that he's doing most of his moving with the wind, you know, quartering to him a little bit. And again, time of year have a lot to do with that. If it's the heat of the moment, like, you know, those 2 weeks in November or end of October and in November up until Thanksgiving, then I would tend to think they probably move with a little bit more of the wind in there, using their nose to get around rather than trying to stay alive. Their focus has changed just a little bit from that prey animal where they know things are trying to kill them, they want to stay alive. That's my best way of doing that, to I'm trying to breed and, you know, sire young type of deal. So that movement can change a little bit, but I still use the wind just to where, you know, it's a very touchy wind right there.
Yeah,
it's hard to explain. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of it.
No, you are. I wanna throw an example out at you of my own situation and kind of hear what you think about some of my ideas on this, or kind of putting what you're talking to into action. So I've got this deer I've been hunting forever. Everyone knows I've been talking about this stupid deer forever. We'll call him H, and I've got a spot on the edge of one of the main bedding areas he hangs out in that's to the west of me, or sorry, to the east of me. And I can't hunt in there because it's on the neighboring landowners. So we often, though, have westerly winds blowing from my side of the line into the bedding area where he's at. I've always assumed, though, and based on pictures in the past, he most often comes out to my side of the line when we've got those kinds of winds because, as you were talking about, he wants to have like a southwest or northwest or west wind where he can see what he's getting or smell what he's getting himself into. He's trying to use that, usually quartering to some degree, when he's going to come out to feed or check does or whatever in this area where there's a food source that a lot of does come to. But I have also historically hunted this area a decent bit now over the past 3 years trying to kill this deer. So I've always thought I can't hunt there with a due west wind because it blows like right into that stuff. But I've always the one time I've tried, or when I try to hunt him, is usually when there's like a northwest wind or maybe a southwest wind, because I kind of, as you alluded to, I think I can maybe cut the corners there, hoping that he's more more east of me, so that I'll go kind of angled beneath him. He'll still want to come out that way because he's got a quartering wind. It's in his favor. My hope being that the wind angle will be just enough off of that where he's coming from that I'll slip past him. So that's usually the scenario I try hunting it in. So that's what I've done in the past. Sometimes, though, deer end up still catching my wind because I am blowing in the general direction of the bedding, cutting the bottom of it. So I've gotten blown out a handful of times doing that, and I'm always, always kicking myself like, shoot, I shouldn't have done that. He never showed up, probably because I spooked some does and alarmed the whole area. Man, can't talk. But going back to something you mentioned at the beginning, thermals and pressure, I'm wondering if I might be able to better get away with this kind of scenario if I'm in a situation where I have one of those light wind days, where I have a high pressure day that's pulling up my air. So maybe I hunt this when I have that kind of quartering wind, so like a northwest wind that's just off of where I think he is. But I might be able to get away with it even better if I waited for that scenario with the high pressure that's kind of pushing my wind up on maybe that kind of lightish wind day. Is my way of thinking through this the way you envision people thinking how to make these decisions, factoring in thermals, pressure, wind, and how deer use all that?
Yeah, but when I think of it, I don't think like the everyday bow hunter or deer hunter goes into it like that. I think, wind and thermals, or you could probably take thermals and air currents out of the equation. It's just when you talk 101, and how I think most people think of it as wind, and more so wind direction. What you're explaining, I think, is a very advanced level, and I think you're probably on to something there. If again, those high pressure days, light air days, definitely give you the advantage. And then I think that quartering wind, if just almost that wrong wind, as long as you know it's not going somewhere and hitting something and eddying back into the area where you think's holding that deer, I think that's probably your best bet. But I'd check on that first to make sure you'd somehow inadvertently your scent's not entering that deer's bedding area, even when you think you have the wind direction nailed down. Yeah. But to answer your question is, yes, how you're looking at it, I think is a very advanced level. I think it's the correct way to do it. But I think probably most deer hunters, the 101 version is just, the wind's coming out of the north. I want deer north of me, so I want, my scent to the south, that type of deal. Mm-hmm. Very basic.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a great place to start.
Yes, absolutely. One final thing on the wind side of things that we haven't touched on is when it comes to all this stuff, does any of this change if you're hunting in a ground blind or a box blind versus a tree stand?
Not necessarily change. I found in a ground blind that it seems to be they're just more in tune, I think, because maybe it's because if my thermals are going up, I'm on the ground, so I'm down on their level, and then quite on the flip side of an evening, if I'm at a ground blind, it's usually on a food plot, so then it usually is an evening in the early season. And I just find deer when I'm on the ground at their level of an evening, when I know the thermals are coming down, I just feel like they're at high alert all the time. Let's say I haven't had luck. I've had instances in luck where they weren't alarmed, but I think it definitely gets trickier in a ground blind depending on the situation. Close quarters, I like to call it. If you're in somewhere tight and expecting them to be close to you, you have to take in a lot of consideration to your scent and then also the noise that you make inside of it. Yeah. I've hunted out of the tower blinds in Texas, but I don't have a whole lot of experience out of them. I basically hunt lock-ons everywhere else, lock-ons and ladder stands.
Yeah. Do you think that any of these things, when it comes to how you're thinking about wind, do you think any of this is different in a public land or heavily pressured area versus big private property that's well managed and very little hunting pressure? Do you see any of this? Would you think about it differently at all in those two scenarios?
I don't know if I'd think about it differently. I think the more information you're armed with, again, stacking those odds in your favor is a benefit. I think being able to apply a lot of this type of thought process on public land is more difficult to do, just because you probably don't have history with the animals you're trying to hunt. You may not have as much knowledge of the topography, because most public lands are pretty big areas. The pressure factor goes up, so I think the deer are definitely, they may move less. They're probably more on high alert depending on pressure. So it just makes it more difficult to apply. But if you do understand it and can apply it, again, you're putting those odds in your favor for sure. But I hunted a lot of public land, and honestly, back in the day when I was just, late teens, early 20s, and I didn't even have a tree stand. I did a lot of hunting off the ground. I did a lot of steel hunting when the weather was right for it, or, I did a lot of bow hunting in the rain and a rainstorm, and I would just sneak around and check on different areas. I've shot a lot of deer off the ground. And you learn a lot when you get in close quarters like that. Scenarios tend to play themselves out more because you have a bow and you're on the ground and, for whatever reason, you couldn't get a shot off, or this, that, and the other. So just the simple fact that you're there and experiencing it, and the scenario is playing out, whereas if you were a gun hunter, or, maybe you weren't even there, you didn't learn anything from it. So just the fact that, you put yourself in those situations, you get to learn from it. I think access is the hardest thing on public land, especially, when I was hunting a lot of public land. A lot of it was really hard to get to, and, you worked your butt off, to get to it. You were tired by the time you got there, type of deal. And then, you had to hunt all day, change your clothes, and, this, that, and the other. So it's definitely a unique set of challenges for sure.
Yeah. And I know that access, entry and exit and all of that is something that you really focus on as an important part of your hunting strategy when you're targeting mature deer. And you alluded to it a little bit earlier when you said you want to make sure your wind's not blowing into areas you think the deer are going to be when you're coming in and out. Can you give us some more detail into what you think about when it comes to accessing and exiting properties, and any like the more advanced ways that you go about trying to get a good entry and exit?
Yeah. When I go in and set up a property or a new property type of deal, I look at the top of maps, and you do some boots on the ground stuff in, the late winter, early spring. So you're looking at old sign, and, you're seeing where everything kind of comes together and where you need to be. And, you put an X on the map type of deal, or drop a pin, and then, you look at the parking areas. Even if it's private ground, and you still have areas where you can park type of deal, and then you figure out the best ways in there. So just as you're looking for that stand location, I think it's in the late winter, it's just as important to look for those areas where you think deer are going to feed come the upcoming bow season, and where they're going to, bed the upcoming bow season. So where they're at, where they're going to be coming from, and where they're going to be going to. And then you have, okay, this, you find an area that's tore up with sign, rubs and scrapes, and, inside edges, and, has everything. Then you want to ask yourself, well, I know the deer were here. They laid down all this sign. Where did they come from? So then you need to find, okay, and you need, late winter, you're looking at tracks, and you're following backwards, and you find a couple thickets here and there, or hillsides, and, it may be, probably that time of year, it's a south-facing slope to catch the morning sun, and that type of deal. And then you look at all that, so you have on your map, where you want to hunt, where you think the majority of the deer are coming from, and even where they're going to go if they're past you, once they passed you. And, okay, then here's where I park. Now how can I get there, on a predominant, in my areas, the predominant winds are south, southwest to west. You get a lot of northerly winds in late October, early November. So I'm going to park only a couple specific areas, no matter what, usually, even, the most private farm, you probably only have a couple specific parking areas. And sometimes you just got to walk way out of your way. You may have to walk down a dried up stream bed, or down the hardtop road. I've done that a lot. One of the neighbors where I hunt, he thinks I'm crazy. He watches me park my truck at the barn, and, I walk, between a quarter and a half a mile down the road past his house and enter the woods above his house. And, he's like, what are you doing? Type of deal. But, then I get into a drainage, and, I sneak my way into a stand. It makes all the difference in the world, and when you start doing that stuff and paying attention to entering and leaving a stand site undisturbed, hunting undisturbed deer, your deer sighting, I'm not just talking buck sightings, but, when you go into a stand, not you specifically, when you were going into a stand, not paying attention to that stuff, and you see 2, 3, 4 deer, and it was a good sit, and everything was good, and you were happy type of deal. And then you really start paying attention to those little details, and where you used to see 2 or 3 or 4 deer, now you're seeing 8, 9, 10, and 3 of them were bucks, and one of them was a big shooter. And none of them, the most important part, none of them knew you were there. That's when it really gives you a really cool feeling. To me, it's when it's not. To me, it's that whole romance to hunting is why we hunt. I really, really enjoy that part of it. I don't want to say as much or more than the killing part, because at the end of the day, we're all hunters, and we want to hold those big antlers at the end of the day. But there's something about having deer, parade past you, knowing where they come from, why they were where they were, how they got to 15 yards in front of you and then on by you, and had no, clue in their mind that you were there hunting them, because everything was right. And you specifically manipulated it to be that way. There's really something to be said to that I think really, really a lot of people are missing out on. It's too much about just got to go kill a buck. It doesn't matter why or how or where, and you kill the buck and it feels good for a while. But whenever you really start piecing it together, that whole, that learning experience, or the apprenticeship program, if you will, and you become a journeyman, is just, it's a really cool feeling. And I guess it's a sense of satisfaction. You feel like anything, you put your work into, you feel better about type of deal. But I really enjoy that.
Oh yeah, the chess match, all of the work that goes into that makes, every time you see the antlers on the wall, or every time you take a bite out of that animal, when you have a meal, it all makes all those things so much sweeter when you know just the level of understanding that was required to get to that point, the level of work that was required to get to that point, the level of frustration and failure probably leading up to those successes. Man, it makes it all a whole lot more meaningful when you have to go through that to get to your end goal.
Yeah, and it's such a hard thing to explain, to the non-hunters or people that may just be, hunt a little bit, they don't understand, but it's like anything else, when you start, pouring your heart into it, it's definitely, and there's nothing wrong with, being outdoors and enjoying all that. You learn a lot of good life lessons out there too, type of deal. But it's just really cool.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. So speaking of this kind of process, though, like getting to the point where like you and I are at, maybe where we really want that difficult challenge, and figuring out all the details. But also there are some people that are at the beginning of that journey where just trying to find any deer, it would be an incredible challenge to surmount. Now, I'm about to shift topics here, but before I do that, I want to take one last break today and thank our partners at Whitetail Properties. And speaking of new hunters, Whitetail Properties puts out a series of YouTube videos. They call it their Land Beat video series. I've been mentioning it every other week here. They've got a new video out that I think new hunters especially, or really anyone interested in becoming a better deer hunter, might be of interest to you. This one dives into trail camera tactics, which trail cameras are one of those most incredible and useful tools for a deer hunter. You can learn so much about deer behavior, about what specific deer are doing, or just how deer use a property, whether that be a mature buck or does or young deer, whatever it is that you want to target. Cameras can help you do that. So this quick video covers some of the basics, including when to hang them, where to hang them, and a bunch of things along those lines. Very simply, if you go to the Whitetail Properties YouTube channel, you will see it's the most recent Land Beat video. It's called Trail Camera Tactics. Check it out. And if you'd like to learn more about Whitetail Properties and the properties they have for sale, you can visit whitetailproperties.com. Talking about new hunters, I know, and I'm kind of shifting here to a totally different topic, but I do know that both you and Furter, with what you guys are doing with the QDMA, are really focusing on hunter recruitment, trying to help bring new people into the fold. And before we go too much longer with the podcast, I want to make sure we get to touch on that a little bit. Is that something you can talk about a little bit, what you guys are up to?
Yeah. Part of, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I'm really fortunate to work in the industry, revolving around the whitetail deer, because that's just basically been my life. And, we're at a point right now with the QDMA and a lot of the other nonprofit conservation organizations out there. I mean, we're specifically focused on whitetail deer, but as they're the number one sought after big game animal in the country, and you start looking at the business behind that, if you will, there's a whole business side of that, and how much money the whitetail deer generates, and how conservation's funded through, which I know you're aware of, the Pittman-Robertson Act and such. The hunter recruitment rate is in a decline, and in the last 10 years, we've lost about 30% of the licensed buyers. And, that starts to equate to dollars and cents. And then obviously you have the snowball effect, when state agencies have to make cutbacks and so forth. And there's the big public land moving out there, and license sales, are a driving force behind that as well. So, a lot of the nonprofit conservation organizations are doing everything they can to, try to, turn around the hunter recruitment rate, at least slow the decline down. Like I said, we've lost 30% in the last 10 years. That's alarming in and of itself. To think that as passionate as I am about, whitetail deer hunting or hunting in general, it's all I've ever done in my life has been a hunter. It's literally all I've ever done. I couldn't imagine, I don't know what I would do, if I didn't have hunting in my life. And I mean that when I say, what would I do in November? I don't know, so to think that this could potentially go away. I mean, again, there's a lot of statistics out there, and we're not trying to, be the sky is falling type, but at the end of the day, we've lost, a good amount of hunters in the last 10 years. The average age of the licensed buyer right now is somewhere around 56 years old. And all research says there's a hard stop at 70. So, there's, technically speaking, or arguably speaking, there's a shelf life to hunting as we know it. It's not that it would ever go away, but in the next, 12 to 15 years, you could see a drastic cut in funding for, this resource that we love to chase around and cherish type of deal. So, we've really shifted our focus. The first, we're in our 30th year. The first 15 or 20 years, we were very big into habitat and herd management and overall, the whitetail deer, health of the herd type of deal, and then the habitat. And now it's, the deer are going to be okay. We got to have people there to hunt them type of deal. So we're really focused on the youth. We have a big youth involvement, but probably more so are the first-time adult onset hunters. I think you mentioned that you called Josh that earlier in the podcast. But, we found through research that taking a kid hunting is great, and we always have to continue to do that. The problem is, or the catch is, if you take, a young person hunting today and they want to hunt tomorrow and you're not available, then what do? They're stuck sitting a bench. They don't have a job, so they can't go out and buy stuff. They can't drive themselves to the hunting property or, to state land, whatever it may be. So, we've shifted focus, and we, among other conservation organizations, shifted focus over to the adult onsets, the first time, mid-30, mid-40 somethings that have always had the desire, but maybe nobody's ever taught them or asked them to go. And just as we were talking earlier, if you have the desire, you're 35 or 38 years old, sitting in a cubicle somewhere, have always been interested in hunting, but just never had anybody really around you to take you in. It's intimidating to try to do yourself, and it's even more so intimidating, to maybe ask one of your buddies, at 40 years old, hey, you mind teaching me how to hunt? It's not a very monster thing to do type of deal. So, we're putting some programs out there. We have our Share Your Hunt program, where Field to Fork program, where we're trying to get more people involved in hunting. I'm actually leaving for one in the morning. It's in north central Pennsylvania. We have 6 first-time adult hunters coming into camp. We're going to hunt Friday and Saturday, 2 sets a day, morning and evening. We brought them in back in August and went through a training day with crossbows. I mean, we teach them deer biology. We do some habitat management, everything there is to know about a deer. We teach them how to shoot, and we're going to take them hunting. We're going to teach them how to butcher deer. And the idea is they want to be hunters. They want to source their own protein and sustainability. And we want to hopefully give them enough knowledge to do that, within a few meetings with us. So it is definitely a process, but it's definitely something we're extremely focused on right now as an organization.
I think that's awesome. Now, Furter, you have gotten to be involved in this a little bit already yourself, haven't you? How's that been?
Yeah. Last weekend, actually, I was involved in one. It was called Learn to Hunt. And this one was specifically about deer. It was kind of a joint effort between QDMA, National Wild Turkey Federation, the Michigan DNR, Pheasants Forever has a role in it. And they do these for different species. They have them small game, turkey, pheasant. Basically what it is we've got, this program has received grants from the Cabela's Outdoor Fund, where they've been able to go out and purchase crossbows and camo and ground blinds through that grant. And then also different branches and chapters will donate money for these types of programs. So what we did is I kind of gave like a deer hunting 101 presentation on a Saturday morning. We spent some time at the range with crossbows, and then there's 4 people there. We were supposed to have 8, but we had just torrential downpours that day. I think scared some people away, but we ended up having 4 people come, and we were able to go out with mentors. Then those new hunters were able to go out with mentors in the afternoon on Saturday, and then Sunday morning. We unfortunately didn't harvest any deer that weekend, but they got a processing demonstration and a butchering demonstration. And, I think every one of those people left and said, yeah, we want to do this again. One gal that came had already purchased a crossbow. So, I mean, these are the people that are going to go out and start contributing funds to Pittman Robertson dollars, and they can go out and replicate these types of, they can go hunt on their own where a youth is going to need a family member or a friend or somebody to drive them to a spot, where these people can go out and do that themselves the next day if they wanted to. So yeah, I got to do that one. One of our branches up in northern Michigan, our Tip of the Mitt branch, they're doing a Field to Fork program where they've got 3 hunters hunting with mentors throughout the season. And one of those new hunters shot a buck the first week of the season already. And so just a ton of great success going on with that kind of stuff.
That's really cool. And it's great to see you guys and the different branches out there, stepping up and donating their time and funds to make that happen. Because it's one thing to say it, it's a lot more to actually go and actually do these things. So I think it's pretty awesome, Josh, seeing you going out on these mentor hunts. You went and you did the youth hunt. A weekend or 2 before that, you did a veterans hunt. And I know you're leaving again next week to do another youth hunt, helping out people. So I just want to say, as a friend, I commend you and everyone else out there who is donating their time in this kind of way. Huge props. I'm so glad that people are doing that. I need to do a better job of doing more of that. I was hoping to be able to meet up with you guys for that first-time hunter event last weekend. Didn't work out, but I need to do a better job of that. And I hope that people listening, I hope there's a few people listening that maybe are intrigued by the opportunity to help mentor some new hunters too. And if that's the case, Ryan, how can a hunter listening get involved and be able to get involved with the programs you guys have out there to become a mentor or helper with some of these things you guys are doing?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different ways, and I'm glad you asked. Almost every state now, not every state, if they don't have a designated R3 coordinator, so it's retain, reactivate, and recruit new hunters. States are, state agencies are putting in an R3 coordinator. If they don't have an acting one, specifically hired for that position, they usually have somebody within the state that's covering that. So that the first thing they can do if they don't want to be involved with a QDMA branch, or if maybe there's not one close to them, they can go through the state through their R3 coordinator. They can definitely put you in touch with a hunter or a group of people, or the next event they have coming up. Or they could easily seek out a QDMA branch. I mean, we're not in everyone's backyard, but usually there's one anywhere within the whitetails range within driving distance. Reach out to them and tell them that you'd like to be involved. Or it could be as simple as, you don't have to be involved with the group, and you don't have to be involved with the state R3 coordinator. You can just, if you're a hunter, you can do your part by seeking somebody out that maybe it's you work with or go to church with or teaches your life school, wherever it may be, that wants to learn how to be a hunter. Take them hunting with you. Teach them how to be a hunter. If just think about it, there's somewhere around 10 or 11 million deer hunters in the country right now, depending on who's doing the counting. But if half of them took one new person hunting next year, we could fix the problem in 1 year type of deal. So it could be something just as that simple. Seek out somebody that's never hunted before but has the interest that may run in your circles, and take the time to take them to teach them to be a hunter. And I know it sounds like a lot, and even with me, I hunt private land. I have a lease in Ohio, but honestly, I've done this now for a couple of years. We've had kind of an internal QDMA challenge amongst our staff that, we're going to seek out new hunters every year, and take at least one per. And we've done that. And it is a very satisfying and gratifying thing to do. It's not, you don't mind doing it. Once you get involved and see the level of enthusiasm that these people display, the appreciation they have for you taking the time out, and honestly, you develop some of the best friendships you may ever have in your life through hunting. And this is a perfect example of that. So, don't be, intimidated by it. Don't think it's too much, or, you only have so much time. The sport is depending on it. We need people out there to teach others how to become hunters. And, think of it as almost a sense of as your responsibility. Just one a year, introduce them. It doesn't have to be deer hunting either. That's another thing. There's nothing wrong with teaching somebody how to be a small game hunter. Take them squirrel hunting, take them rabbit hunting, take them pheasant hunting. Just get them involved in the outdoors and let them progress naturally. That's how we're going to fix this for sure.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, what if someone listening is a new hunter and maybe they want to hunt, so they've been listening to hunting podcasts, they stumbled across Wired to Hunt, somehow they managed to listen to the very advanced stuff we talked about without getting discouraged and shutting this thing off? What if there's a new aspiring hunter and they're hearing about these programs and they're thinking in their heads, whoa, that would be amazing. I could really use a weekend mentor program. That would be such a great start for me. How can they get tapped in and signed up for a program like this? Where do they find that information?
Yep, same type of thing. Our website, we went from last year, I think, Josh, we did, 2 or 3 nationwide, and we're going to do 15, 18, or 20 this year. And obviously we hope to build off of that next year. So our website, we have all of our Field to Fork programs listed. You can get involved that way. And then again, through your state agencies and your R3 coordinator. I mean, one phone call to the state agency, especially with a specific R3 coordinator, that's their job. If you're a hunter and want to learn how to hunt, they're gonna place you within the right people, for sure.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, I'll add one more thing to that too. Is there's a lot of different resources out there. Like I know just recently, a lot of us QDMA staff just became digital mentors on a platform called Powderhook. Mark, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, but that's a great place for people to check out too, and maybe be able to connect with a mentor through something like that, where you can find people who are willing to take you out. And maybe you don't even need someone to take you out, but you have questions for them. So many different ways to connect with people in this day and age. And do a Google search. You can find people, I'm sure. Get on Facebook. There's groups, or like I said, there's digital mentors on this Powderhook network that you can check out. So all kinds of different opportunities to get connected with people.
Social media has been, not to interrupt you, Joe, social media, Instagram there's the local board movement out there. There's a group of people that want to source their own protein, and hunters, and being a hunter, one of the best ways to do that. Just about any avenue of communication you can think of, you can get a hold of somebody, and hopefully for the most part, you're going to find a willing mentor out there that's going to be helpful to you.
Yeah. Josh, can you elaborate on what the digital mentor thing is with Powderhook? What is the service that you'll be providing to folks by way of that? So if someone's hearing this and they're thinking, I could use a digital mentor, what does that mean?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, because I just signed up for it last week. But what I did is I basically went on there and put some information about myself, how long I've been hunting, what species I've been hunting, how far I'm willing to travel to mentor a new hunter. And so people can look, they pull up a map or put in your zip code, and they can find where these different mentors are that they can try to connect with if they're looking for someone to take them out hunting, or kind of ask them questions. So just kind of a cool networking tool for new hunters to get involved with people that are in their area. They just maybe don't know about them.
Very cool. Awesome. And that's the Powderhook app. That sounds like a great way to get connected with Furter and get Furter to take you out to his favorite tree stands. All right.
Can I touch on one more thing? Let me
Please.
touch on one more thing, Mark.
Yeah, do it.
And this goes back to what Ryan was saying about just, we need to do a better job as hunters taking other people out. And, one of the individuals that's going through our Field to Fork program up at the tip of the Mitt Branch, he has worked for a company that is very involved in outdoor clothing and workwear. And I know that he works every day with other hunters, and he is interacting with other hunters on a daily basis. And he's just never had anybody say, "Hey, why don't you come out with me?" We just did another Field to Fork. I think this one was in New York, Ryan, where
New
Hank
Hampshire.
Forster New Hampshire. Okay. So there was a gun manufacturer that had people reach out to us that they wanted to learn how to hunt. And there's people there that hunt, right? I mean, there's no reason why we can't do a better job as hunters saying, hey, identify these people that have shown an interest in it, and then reach out and offer that lending hand to get them out in the woods and, be a mentor to them. We just got to do a better job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very true. Well, I certainly appreciate what you guys are doing. So thank you, Ryan and Furter and Quality Deer Management Association for stepping up and leading in this way. I 100% agree. It's necessary. And I think, we need to wrap it up here, but I want to give you a chance, Ryan, if there's any last plug you want to make or any last topic we haven't touched on that you really want to make sure you can mention. If you got any final parting words, what would you like to share?
I think the only thing is, I know we definitely dove into advanced level, and the last thing I want to do is intimidate or scare somebody away from hunting. I think it's important to get out there and do whatever you want to do and enjoy it, and just cherish the moment type of deal. And it doesn't have to be that serious. It can be a lot. It's a lot of fun if it is. It's also a lot of fun if you're not taking it that serious. So the main thing I want to leave people with is, don't be intimidated. And if you're doing anything, it's better than nothing. Get out there and enjoy the great outdoors and being a deer hunter, for sure.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. And I will say, and I'll probably mention this at the beginning of the episode, so this is the second time you'll probably have heard this, but if you are new, make sure to go back and listen to that Deer Hunting 101 podcast we did. Great kind of starting point that will help put some of these basic pieces in place so that when you go back and listen to a lot of these other podcasts that we've done that go more advanced, you have that foundation. Do not, just like you said, Ryan, don't feel bad if some of these things are a little bit complicated, because it took all of us, all three of us here talking, years and years and years and decades of experience and trial and error to start figuring some of these things out and making sense of it all in our heads. So it's perfectly fine to go through that process yourself.
And one more thing, Mark, for new hunters is QDMA's got a free ebook that people can go download, and it's a great resource for new hunters, and even people that are experienced. Has some great info in there. It's a free download from our website.
So I just go to QDMA.com and what should I search for, or where do I find it? Do you know?
Yeah, put an ebook, or I think it's QDMA.com/ebook. I think is a direct link to it.
It's Deer Hunting 101. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that's an awesome tool as well. So, Furter, Ryan, big thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. Ryan, I really enjoyed you kind of divulging the in-depth wind and thermal knowledge that I think for those guys who are trying to take things to the next level, for guys and girls who want to take it to the next level, I think this stuff is really an important focus area. So I found it fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Go further.
And with that, let's wrap this one up.
Okay.
And that's a wrap, folks. So thank you for listening. I hope you will check out those mentorship programs and get involved, like Furter mentioned. And other than that, I suppose I'll just give you all another reminder that my new Wired Hunt content will be featured and shown now on themeateater.com. It's the new website for Meat Eater Inc., which is the new company I'm a part of now with Steve Ranella and a handful of other folks. Lots of cool new content there, not just my stuff, but now stuff from Steve, stuff from Ben O'Brien and Hunting Collective, stuff from April Vokey and Anchored, Eduardo Garcia, and all sorts of other people will be showing up there soon. Check it on out, browse around, lots of interesting stuff. With that all said, I hope you're going to be in the tree here soon. I hope you have an amazing hunt and hunts coming up. I hope the wind is in your face. I hope that big bucks will be running into the bottom of your tree stand, and I hope you shoot straight. So until next time, good luck out there. Thank you so much for following along and being a part of the Wired to Hunt community, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.